Good night. Ajmahari here. How many people, like so many people out there, are in these relationships with borderlines, right? Then you have to do all this work to understand what is that and research it, and stuff starts happening. And so often people with BPD are going to rupture the relationship in so many different ways. And with every episode of rupture, be that withdrawal, a ghosting, or a raging kind of episode, there's going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of effort to try to understand what happened and to try to talk about the person with BPD about that over and over and over in these relationships, but never going to get any closure. You're not ever going to get any closure to anything they've done, anything they've said, any episode, anytime they ghosted, anytime, because some people ghost on and off and these relationship recycles are just happening like regularly. And when that's the case, you're getting more traumatized, you're being more hurt, but it just strengthens everything about the trauma and the fantasy bond. It strengthens so many different things. And so it's so compelling because I watch clients do this all the time. I don't see the part where they go back to the borderline, but I'm working with them, and then all of a sudden I don't hear from them again because they've gone back to the borderline. And there's ways that I can tell that, because it's like they don't just purchase one session, but then suddenly, they're not making, after making several sessions or doing the work, they, and I know where they are because they tell me where they are and what's happening. And then the next thing is, it's pretty predictable, unfortunately, that a lot of people are still going to go back again and again. And not every client that I work with, obviously, this is not everybody. Not every client that I'm working with or have worked with goes back to the person with BPD, but many, many will before they ever stop doing said and actually get into working on more of breaking the trauma bond. So I have a few notes here because these are 10 things that are happening for you as a codependent to one degree or another. Maybe really mildly codependent, really significantly, maybe you're significantly codependent, maybe you're really severely codependent. You may or may not be aware of that yet. So the first thing about why do people recycle? Why is it after they've hurt you and traumatized you and you don't know what's going on, but like you just know you have to get back to them because like you feel like you can't live with them and you can't live without them? Well, there's 10 aspects of that. I'm going to go through here as quickly as I can, because your time is important too. So first of all, it's the trauma bond. So I've written these things down. The trauma bond, right? Because the ghosting itself activates your abandonment wound, activates people with codependencies abandonment wound, or just maybe abandonment fear, fear of rejection. And that deepens the trauma bond rather than having anything whatsoever to do with breaking it or helping you out with moving forward through it in a healing way. And the nervous system, your nervous system craves the quote reconnection that isn't really all that connected, but feels so connected again, doesn't it? So you're craving your nervous system, on a nervous system level, you're craving the connection with your person with BPD. And that's to soothe. Your craving strengthens the more that you as a person with codependency, been ghosted by somebody with BPD, you are craving that person even more because you're trying to soothe your own withdrawal symptoms from the BPD relationship and, in fact, the trauma bond of said. And so secondly, the fantasy bond and that illusion of love that most people still don't want to hear much about unless and until you're seriously ready to pretty much go no contact or super low contact if you have children. People with codependency just cling to this fantasy of, who you think the person with BPD is or who they are in the good times. And of course, they're not that in the bad, awful, horrible times. But you just cling into that fantasy of who you thought they were, who you might still falsely believe in a fantasy way that they still could be. And also that potential. Because people with BPD, you know, in their fragmented identity and their fragmented lack of self, they have shards of self, so to speak, pieces of self that don't go together. And there is this one piece in a lot of people with BPD, right? Well, extremely wonderful in the physical intimacy and more, and having positive traits and qualities, but they just can't really be that fragment of self that you experience that way, because all the rest of the fragmented pieces don't go along with that fragmented piece. And so ghosting becomes interpreted by many of you out there. Most people have been with a person with BPD or are with somebody with BPD right now. Ghosting becomes interpreted as a temporary setback rather than evidence of just how unhealthy this dynamic is that you're experiencing, and just how impossible it's going to be for more people than not, like a high percentage of people out there, to be able to make these relationships work. Because BPD relationships don't work, and especially when they're untreated or just a little bit of DBT here and there. BPD is really a deep, complex, pervasive issue, especially in communication and relationships, and people need years of psychodynamic treatment to really be able to bring to you what you want and need in a healthy relationship. But then again, you know, people with codependency need to realize if you all of a sudden got that all emotionally available, congruent, age-appropriate, pretty mature person, you might be struggling more in a relationship than not, because there's a reason why you ended up, I shouldn't put it that way, but why you got with a person with BPD, and why that's something many people are still fighting for in these BPD relationship recycles, which are just creating more and more woundedness and more trauma for you. And it's not just all from the borderline, it's also you abandoning yourself. And so the third thing here I just wanted to mention is, of course, the cognitive dissonance of it all. You know, because cognitive dissonance happens when there's two existing opposite truths, right? Now, they're not really equal and opposite real truth, but that's how they're perceived. So this person with BPD hurts you, that's one side, versus that the person with BPD is your soulmate. That's your quote twin flame or your soulmate, that's your meant to be person. And you just love them so much, in spite of the fact that maybe not all your love is super healthy either, not to the point of what people with BPD are lacking, but still. And the other thing too is that you might think that you need to fight for love, that love, you know, real love is going to last, is something that, yeah, it takes a lot of fighting to get. No, because where there's fighting and abuse and trauma and on, off and ghosting and recycling, there and ruptured relationships on and off, there's nothing healthy about that dynamic, and there's not really healthy love that can exist or even find its way to being, let alone lasting in that kind of relationship. So recycling the relationship is an unconscious way to resolve the dissonance. It's a way you're trying to resolve the dissonance. It won't ever really resolve the dissonance. And it's because you're choosing that fantasy narrative. And that's really important for you to think about. Because some people might say, I've had clients say, well, you know, even if it's fantasy, like it feels so good. But in the long term, you're losing yourself and you're getting hurt way more than you're getting all the really good, you know. And the fourth point here is hope and fixation on change. Because codependents believe, you might well believe, well, if they come back this time, will be different. Oh my God, so many people, so many times, not much different. Nothing really different. It's such a predictable cycle when people are getting back into, you know, the relationship recycles. So, but you believe, oh wow, like it's going to work this time. I understand BPD much more now, says the average codependent, and therefore now I can handle him or her better. I can understand more. Oh my God, they're going through this horrible stuff, which people with BPD are. and you feel so bad for them. But that's just a recipe for like you're throwing yourself out of yourself. You're gonna lose touch with yourself even more. And so ghosting gets reframed by many of you people out there with codependency as that the person with BPD is really struggling and maybe they can't even help it. And you'd be a horrible person if you, quote, abandon them, like to take care of yourself, to move on, to heal, to be happier in your life, etc. And so you often, people with codependency, think of this person with BPD as struggling rather than how they are in a way rejecting you, because in a way it's not even about rejecting you. It's just about what they can't handle, what they can't emotionally regulate, what they really don't know how to do in any healthy adult way to connect, to stay connected, to be able to handle the closeness and then the distance and the moving in and out of normal, healthy relational dynamics. And the fifth thing here I want to point out is that people with codependency often have, more than they realize consciously, a fear of being alone. And I've heard many clients tell me, no, I'm not afraid to be alone. I can go and do this and I do that, and maybe they work alone, maybe they have all these hobbies and they can do this and that alone, and it's great. That's not the same as doing those things. Well, you don't get any time if you're in a relationship with a borderline, but if you're doing those things in the past, you've been doing those things in another relationship in your past, you still have that person in that relationship, right? But codependency isn't triggered by healthier partners like it is by borderline partners. And so the ghosting intensifies for people out there like yourself, if you're relating to this, and if you have codependency, or even counterdependency, by the way, which are two sides of the same coin and sometimes have points of intermingling between the two. So ghosting can intensify the fear of abandonment or the fear of rejection, and returning to the relationship, recycling it again, feels safer somehow than facing the solitude, the self-reflection, but more to the point, the pain and agony that's been triggered within you, what you've been through with the borderline, where that is multi-layered and coming from your childhood as well. Something big has been triggered inside of you, the person who's with the borderline doing all this recycling, chasing intermittent reinforcement. And the sixth thing here I wanted to add is intermittent reinforcement. It's just like a gambling hit of, quote, perceived and fantasy bonded, reconnection after ghosting, and it keeps you hooked because they keep coming back, right? So next time's going to be okay. But a lot of people with BPD, when they ghost and they keep coming back and they have that pattern, one day they're not going to come back. They're going to ghost and not come back if you don't get yourself out of this first. And that could be even more devastating and even more difficult to heal from. And the unpredictability of people with BPD, they're there one minute, they're ghosting the next, or they're yelling at you, or it's ghosting on and off. The unpredictability of that wires your brain to this kind of compulsive, really false hope that's within the fantasy bond dynamics of these relationships. And the seventh thing is a lack of boundaries, right? People with codependency often don't set or hold firm boundaries. And the thing about that too is, even if you try or you're able to understand more about boundaries than the average person with codependency, doesn't work with people with BPD. They don't understand. They fight against boundaries. They don't accept boundaries. Not like you can say, hey, I really can't get together with you tonight, or we really can't spend tonight together, like from 8 to 10 at night or something, because I have these 2 hours of work I have to do or something like that. And that would be a boundary and a need that you have. A person with BPD is not going to be okay with that unless they've had amazingly amounts of years of proper treatment in a psychodynamic modality. And so boundaries and ghosting, well, ghosting is tolerated as part of the cycle, often, which is a person with borderline personality disorder reacting and rejecting and fighting you against any kind of boundary or boundaries that you try to either explain or just live out. And the borderline says, not doing that, and off they go. And then all these things are applying to you again if you're still in this codependent relationship recycling place. And recycling reinforces the belief that your needs don't really matter, that you're not really all about holding these boundaries as much as you want to be connected, reconnected, and with them. So do they fully understand that? Maybe not, but regardless, people with BPD just don't do boundaries. And the 8th thing I want to mention here is people with codependency, you're reenacting childhood wounds, and often not consciously. Because a lot of people with codependency, you get into a relationship with a person with BPD. When I'm always talking about in recovery work that I do with clients, in these situations, try to break the trauma bond, the fantasy bond, betrayal bond, get out of the relationship with the person with BPD, stop the recycling, which is painful as heck at first. I'm going to be honest with you about that. But your childhood wounds are being reenacted. And so I'm always asking the question often in a video or a podcast I do, or not just asking the question, but also saying to you that you need to work with someone. I'm out here to resonate with you if I work. No, I'm not out here to resonate with you. I'm out here to work with you if I resonate with you, okay? But you need to get into that healing recovery journey of your own therapy because you need to know that you're reenacting wounds. And one of the biggest questions in that work is, well, how did you get into this relationship with a person with BPD in the first place? That's not a blame thing or a judgment thing. It's just a thing that when people understand that, it goes back into working on family of origin and childhood woundedness. That is a big part of healing codependency and breaking the trauma bond, fantasy bond, betrayal bond with the borderline. So ghosting mirrors often for people the emotional neglect that you might have experienced to some degree in childhood. And remember, for a lot of people, this neglect or some abandonment or just getting hurt somehow by not being seen enough or heard enough, or maybe not seen or heard at all, is often things that people have tucked away in their unconscious now, because maybe you got hurt when you were 3 or 5 or 8 or 10. And then we get older and we grow up and we just think, oh, that doesn't matter. And we just push it away. That's why it's not in necessarily, depending who you are, if you're watching this right now, may not be in your conscious mind at all. And like I've said before, so many clients come to me and like, my childhood was fine. My parents were really loving. I couldn't possibly be carrying childhood woundedness that would mean that I have codependency, even mildly. Well, the point is, yes, that's what happens to people that get in relationships with people with BPD. That's what's already happened to you. That's what you're carrying. That's what you're reenacting. And so is it always in people's conscious awareness? No, not at all. That's what the therapy that I offer is for as well, so that you can bring that to consciousness, so you can start to understand how you got into the relationship and can be doing the other work of figuring out what happened to you when you were young and reconnecting to the wounded inner child. Because otherwise it's not really something, unless you had really capital T trauma in your childhood, not going to be something you're super aware of or aware at all consciously of necessarily. Doesn't mean there isn't something there. And in fact, the very aspect and reality that you are with somebody with BPD or have been is actually the proof in the pudding that you have childhood woundedness. There's just all these patterns that support that. And so the compulsion to recycle the relationship with the borderline is tied to unconscious desire for you to finally win, finally get something, accomplish getting something, feeling a certain way that you never were able to in childhood. And it's sort of like the finally winning or getting something that you've never gotten in your life emotionally in a relationship, like even when you were a child, of the love that was unavailable from a parent. And the 9th thing I'm going to mention here, and then there's this one more, is narcissistic injury reversal. And I'm not calling you or people with codependency narcissists with this, but being ghosted damages your sense of self-worth greatly each and every time. Recycling is an attempt to repair your self-esteem and the blow to your self-esteem by proving that you're still wanted, that you're so likable, that you are really that good person that you think you are, or you're sure you are. And I'm not saying you're not a good person, but you're a person a little bit lost because you keep abandoning yourself with somebody else who keeps abandoning you. And the 10th thing here about all this is the addiction that people with codependency have to the emotional intensity of people with BPD. And everything about their emotional intensity is unhealthy. It's all about how they need so much more in every domain or area of life. And yet that intensity in some forms of communication, being together, and of course in physical intimacy is out of this world, as I've had described to me billions of times, which is fine. I'm sure I'm going to hear it a billion more times. But calm, healthy connections will feel so boring, right? When you're really addicted to this emotional intensity, things happening quickly, even the drama, even the drama and the chaos, pardon my throat, and the on and off nature of when you're in a pattern with a borderline who's going to ghost often, ghost, come back. So the recycle, the ghost, the recycle, the ghost, the recycle. Not all people with BPD are gonna, you might think you're discarded. It could be a ghost and you're not hearing from them, and you may never hear from them, or you might. So, but there are lots of people with BPD, and these relationships, lots of you out there with your codependency and your fantasy bond, your trauma bond, etc., to the person with BPD, and this dynamic that you really believe, or you know that they have this pattern of like ghost, and a million YouTube things pop up on phones of ghost and come back, ghost and come back. Some people really do have that pattern who are borderline, but like I said, also that pattern will one day break if you don't free yourself from it first, because one time, and can't be predicted when people with BPD have this ghost and recycle, ghost, come back, and you're recycling, one day they just won't come back, and for various reasons. And then what are you going to do? Because that's a world of hurt that is probably equal, but maybe even worse to the world of hurt if you start to try to make changes in your life by working with someone. And so this addiction to the emotional intensity with the cycle of ghosting and returning, it creates emotional highs and lows that mimic drug addiction. And so the message to all of this, as I've said in other videos and podcast episodes, and will continue to interweave in different ways because people hear things differently at different times for different reasons, is that these dynamics, when you're in a relationship, dating and or married or on, off again with a borderline, you get ghosted, then nothing gets resolved, but you take them back and you start again. And it's not re-idealization. It's just that good little shard of the fragmented ego and lack of self. And so they can never offer you more than they've offered you before in that all good category. It's not going to last longer. In fact, every time you recycle the relationship with them after they ghosted you, and like I say, you will resolve nothing about what happened there. They're learning nothing. And actually, neither are you when you stay in the recycling the BPD relationship cycle. So the thing is, when they come back and you, quote, start all over again, and it might be just a day or two later, it might be weeks, could be half a year, could be a year or longer. When you come back to recycling it, you're just getting that little shard of their fragmented lack of self. Again, it's not re-idealization, like I said. And you're going to have that intense getting back together, and you're going to have that, it feels like re-idealization, but it isn't. And then faster and faster with every BPD relationship recycle, they're going to show you the good fragment of self, just this little piece, the all good, the good, the really good. And then faster and faster, you'll have less and less of that really good shard or fragment of who they aren't right now, because their ego is fragmented into like all kinds of pieces, and there's no whole, there's no identity there, there's no whole person. It's going to, in these relationship recycling dynamics, you're going to get the good, but that's going to start to diminish. It's not going to be quite as all fantastic good as it was. It's going to diminish with every recycle, and it's going to go away faster. And so is the borderline going to re-ghost faster and faster and faster. And then at some point, with somebody at BPD, they might be good for 3 recycles, 3 ghostings and coming back, some 10, some 20, who knows. But eventually, there's going to come a time when they just won't come back. And clients I've worked with in that situation seem to be, in a sense, doubly wounded. And you might think quadruple or 10 times over wounded. That could apply too, because you rely on this cycle and you go through the beginnings of what a breakup would feel like, but then you get to go back. And you go back and you relieve your withdrawal symptoms, and you relieve the cognitive dissonance and everything I mentioned in those 10 things there. But you relieve it only temporarily, and all dependent on being with this person with BPD. So the codependent, you see, in you is getting very, very more dependent every time you recycle a relationship. Unhealthy, not going to lead anywhere, going to lead you to where you'd end up if you chose to take care of you and stop abandoning you and want to break the trauma bond, get into therapy. And again, I'm out here to work with you if I resonate with you, my content resonates with you. The point is, when you make the choice, you're going to feel much more empowered. And even though you're going to go through a similar kind of pain in your healing journey, it tends to be much worse for people when there's been all these recycles, and especially that specific pattern of the borderline ghost for like days or a couple weeks or a certain amount of time you can almost predict, and then they come back and you're doing that kind of recycling. You really, really need to take this into your own hands when it feels like the last thing you'd ever want to do, but you need to get into therapy. You need help to break the cycle of what trauma bonding to a person with borderline personality disorder is, and how stuck you are, and how it feels like an addiction. It mimics an addiction. It's not actually an addiction. But the point is, you need to take the first step for you, because you're losing you. And by the time some people come to work with me, they don't even know who they are anymore. And if they got into a situation where they got ghosted, which turned into a discard, and it's that multiplicity of pain, rather than if you just choose right now to put yourself into this, what you know and intellectually, right, but your heart can't catch up to, that you need out of this cycle, out of this unhealthy relational dynamic. And when you do that, making your own choice, it's a much more empowered choice, and it does change the process for people. I'm not going to say it makes it simple, but it isn't quite as painful as when the borderline just all of a sudden doesn't come back, or when you're not sure if you were ghosted or discarded. The point is, you're losing yourself. And many clients that come to work with me more and more than ever before, in fact, I never even saw this 5 or 7 years ago, because I've been doing this work for 30 years online, and 5 years I was doing it offline prior, so 35 years, 35 and a half years now. And there's just no easy way to go about getting out of these relationships except for working on the things that I talk about in a lot of my content, and making that commitment to yourself. But yes, what am I seeing more and more of now in the last 5 years or so? And I never saw it before. I'm seeing people who don't have BPD, who do have codependency, who've been with borderlines, or been with a borderline, or even a narcissist, or comorbidity both, or whatever else is going on with them, wanting to not be here anymore. Really, really close to unaliving themselves. And I'm going to have a small series, maybe, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. Probably it's going to be podcast, but on what is happening to your nervous system in all this. So there's what you're thinking about, there's what you intellectually know, and the cognitive dissonance of all of that, and the other 9 things I mentioned. And then there's just that pain reality that you have to be able to learn how to cope with and go through to break the trauma bond, because obviously you can't have it both ways. So your head knows something's really not okay about this, but I still want it. And your heart is really wanting it. and it's trauma reenactment or adverse childhood reenactment from your childhood, whether you think you had a great, perfect childhood or not, because nobody has a perfect one, doesn't mean your parents had to be abusive for you to still be carrying woundedness from your childhood. And so in that mix of the cognitive dissonance, your heart's in one place and your head's in another. And this is a time to listen to your head, not your heart. There's so many people that go back to these relationships. I've sat through so many sessions with clients explaining to me, telling me they don't want to lose their self-respect. They don't want to lose all their self-worth, if you have any left at this point, or self-esteem, or self-trust. They don't want to lose all. It's pretty much gone. But here comes the reality of they're trying to start some work, but they're talking about a borderline and it's not over. And I usually know with those clients that they're probably going to have to at least recycle another time, or maybe several more times if the option is there. It makes your pain increase exponentially, aside from the good moments, which are going to get shorter and shorter and less. And then you're really going to be in a nightmare position where your nervous system has been pummeled. You might not be aware of how that's affecting you. It could be affecting your physical health and affecting your wallet and, of course, affecting your heart. But the thing is, this is way more injurious to you than the simple, which isn't simple, loss of yourself, the self-abandonment. So I hope that something I said here today might get you thinking about this more, might get you taking your plight and what's really happening to you more seriously. Because if you're still looking for the intermittent reinforcement of the BPD relationship or cycle, and this is the pinnacle of feeling great, you're losing yourself to do that each and every time more and more. So whatever you do, I hope you give this consideration. And nobody usually makes it to the end of my videos. Some people do, but whatever. That's great, because I usually say more important things toward the end. I don't know, maybe not always. But I hope that you listen, and I hope that you hear this, because you are just keeping yourself stuck in a relationship with somebody with BPD based on the intensity, the chaos, the drama, things that don't make sense to you that you would be, quote, addicted to right now. But it's all reenactment of childhood woundedness and something to do with family of origin. And you can take that to the bank. I've been doing this work for so long. There are only so many patterns in humanity, ladies and gentlemen. And I have the pulse of the beat of this pattern. And you're going to lose yourself. There's no winning in the end. There's no hanging on long. People have been in 25, 30-year marriages that all of a sudden crumble, but they weren't great all along, with people with BPD. And that's obviously people that are older than people in their 20s and 30s right now. And the other thing, I really don't like to have to say this, because I'm not trying to make things worse for people with BPD. But if you're young and you're dating somebody with BPD, and young to me is I don't know, all kinds of ages. But if you are still within the childbearing years and you're a female and you're with a male BPD, or you're a male who's, maybe got more time, you could, contribute to the birth of to the making of a child, But the point is, so if you're with a woman who is in that window still, the last thing you want to do, you might not know this, but the last thing that you want to do is have a child with an untreated person, woman or man, but especially men with women. Last thing you want to do is have a child with an untreated borderline, because I have so many clients I'm working with now in the divorce, in the custody issues, and the gynocentrism that goes against men with all that. Anyway, enough from me. I just hope this helps somebody today, and take care.